Okay, welcome back. In the last video we set up being able to draw and scale the blade, and of course putting it away. In this video we're going to focus on being able to set it up so that when we swing the weapon it'll actually do a trace to make sure that we can actually hit things, and it'll give some type of hit response. So first thing we're going to do is going to go in here, and we're going to need to open up our lightsaber. And in the last video, one of the things we did is we set up this event down here called End Attack. We're going to need to create another event called Start Attack. So let's create a custom event, Start Attack. And what we're going to do with this is when we call the functions on here, we can call Start Attack and it'll start tracing with the weapon. And then when we call End Attack, it'll immediately stop it from doing the traces. So that when you're not swinging the weapon, it's not going to return a hit result, so you're not going to just deal damage by just idling. So first thing we're going to add is we're going to hold down B and click to add a branch, and then we're going to drag out our weapon is drawn boolean that we created. And we're going to plug that in to make sure, is the weapon already drawn? Yes or no. If it is not, we are going to call draw weapon. Sorry, activate weapon. We'll plug that in right there. And then before we go any further, one of the things that we still need to add to our weapon is we want to add a little animation trail so that there's a blur effect as the weapon passes through the air. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a particle system and call this anim trail underscore P. And then we'll go ahead and make a create a new folder in our directory. We'll call this particles. And we don't want that in that folder. We want this to be in the content folder. So we'll go ahead and create a particle system. We will call this Lightsaber trail score P. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to need our material, and we already have one. We can pretty much just use the same material that the lightsaber uses. So if we look at our lightsaber blade, we're using lightsaber blade underscore matte. So we can just select that one and then go into here. And then we'll be using that material here as well. And then we can remove our velocity because we don't actually want any velocity on the particles as they come out. And then, okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to add type data, anim trail data. And we're going to go in here and we're going to check, recalculate every frame. We're going to bump this up to 20. And then we're going to go into our spawn. We're going to increase this to about 1,000 to make sure that it's a nice smooth number of particles, and it'll kind of just blend together. And it'll kind of just blend together. So let's go to I think it would be lifetime. So we're going to want this to be relatively short because we don't want like ridiculous trails going all over the place. So let's do 0.05 for the min and max. And then I believe that we don't need to adjust any of this. So I think that this is good. So we'll make sure that we have that selected. We'll go back in here and set that as our template. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and go into our event graph again. And okay, and we'll pull off of here, and we will do begin trails, and it'll automatically pull in our particle system that we have, since there was a reference to it, and then we will go ahead and connect that too. And what this is going to do right here is this is going to, when you start attacking, if the weapon's not drawn, it's going to force the weapon to be drawn so that the blade will activate, and then it'll go to start the animation trail for the blade effect. If the weapon is already drawn, it's just going to go straight to activating the blade effect. So for our first socket, we're going to want to look at our mesh and see what our sockets were that I already had set up from before. So we have 3 sockets in here. Only 2 of them are going to be used for the animation trail. The third one is actually going to be used for when we're doing our hit detection tracing. So we're going to need our base socket. So that is blade base socket, and then we're going to need blade tip socket. So we'll go ahead and we'll do blade base socket, and then blade tip socket. And then for width mode, we're going to do from first socket, and we'll set the width to 1. And then before we move on, we'll go ahead and we will copy that, paste it down here, and under end attack, we will do end trails. Compile, save. So in order to call these, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up some type of information on either our character blueprint or something else to call the start attack function, but we don't actually have anything set up for that. So let's go into, let's just use our mannequin folder and go into animations, and we will create, let's see, is it in here? Nope. We're gonna go and create a blueprint class. We're gonna search for phi, and we're gonna do a anim notify. going to select that, hit OK. We're going to call this attack start notify BP. And then we're going to open that up. We're going to add a function. We're going to call this start attack. Actually, no. We want to delete that. We want to override. So we want to get received notify, and we're going to override this. So we're going to drag this out a little bit so we have some room to work with. We're going to get our mesh component, get owner. We're going to cast to third person character. And connect that up. And then we are going to get our weapon. So we have our weapon component, and then we are going to get the child actor. We're going to cast that to the lightsaber. And then from here, we're going to do our function call to start the attack. We'll just hit this true to make sure that it registers that, yeah, it returned the function. So we'll compile, save, we'll close that, and actually we can close that and that now. And then we're going to right click and duplicate this. And I'm going to have this be attack end notify. If we go back into the function that we made from before on this new notify on the copy, we can grab our start attack, delete that, and instead get end attack. And now whenever these notify events are called, it'll start and end the attack sequence on the weapon. So we can go ahead and close that. And next we're going to need to get our animations that we were using for our attacks. So let's go down here. And we will open up this one first. And let's say the attack probably starts like right around here. Scroll down a little bit and give us a little bit more visual room. And we'll right click in here. We will do add notify, and now we'll see that the notify event blueprints that we just made are available right here. So we can do attack start notify, and then we'll go through here, and probably about there would be good to call the end attack notify. And then we'll just do that for our other two attacks. So like right around here, we will start attack, and then we will end attack, and then do the same thing here. Okay. So we can close that. Now when we test, we have a nice animation trail of the blade moving through the air. And we can see that the event is being called on all 3 attacks. Okay, so going back to our weapon, we're going to go ahead and off of this, we're going to first create a vector, and we're going to call this previous start location. I'll call this A. No, we don't want transform, we want vector. And then we will duplicate and call this B. And then duplicate and call this C. And the reason that we're doing this is we're going to use this to save where the previous trace was done from. And actually we don't want to do that. We want to set. But before we begin each attack, we were going to want to make sure that we are resetting these. So we're going to make sure that this gets set to 0, and then we'll just go ahead and have it set the other 2 to the same. And then it'll go into our next step, which is where things are going to get a little bit more complicated. And we're going to create another timeline. Call this attack detection timeline. And we're going to have this play from the start. Okay, and we're going to pop in here, and we're going to make sure that this is set to loop. And then we can close that. And then off of our end attack event, we're going to add a sequence, which we're not going to worry about the second step for it yet. But we're going to have the first go straight into the stop. And then that'll stop this from doing the tracing. And then next we are going to go ahead and add another sequence. And we're going to add a few more inputs. And before we worry about the first 3, we're going to do something real quick just for simplicity. And we're going to go ahead and set up our sounds for swinging the weapon around. So we're going to do a do once node. We'll add in some reroutes. Clean this up a little bit. And then we will go ahead and off of that we're going to do play sound at location. And we're going to get our actor location so that it'll play the sound effect at where the lightsaber is at in the world space. We're going to get our game instance reference that we set up in the last video, and we're going to add our effects volume into the volume multiplier. And then we're gonna kind of group these up and pull them down, because we're going to pull off of here, and we're not just going to get one sound, we're going to have it actually play a random sound. So we're going to get a select node, and then random int in range. And we're going to do this 0 to 3. And then on here, we're going to right click, we're going to add an option pin, right click, add another option pin, so that we have 4 different sound spots that we can fill. So let's go ahead and grab the sounds that we're going to use. So I think that these are the ones that I was using. Actually, no, I think it was these two, which don't have sound cues, so we're going to go ahead and set that up. Create cue. Now we'll set that as the first one. We'll set this one up as the second one. So we'll have and that. And then we want, I think it's these two. So we'll go ahead and we'll create cues for those as well. Yeah, so we have the first one selected already, so let's go ahead and add that one in. Then we'll select the second one and add that one in. And now, if we were to play this as is, it would play the sound once and then never again. So we're going to need to set this up so that it'll reset this do once node so that we can play the sound effect again. But we don't want it to play continuously in a constant loop unless we put in a delay, because otherwise the sounds will start to really badly overlap. So we're going to add in a delay, and we'll add in a few reroute nodes to clean that up a little bit. And we're going to pull these down a little, actually. Maybe not you. And then we're going to pull off of our delay and go into the reset. Add in some more reroutes to make this look nice and neat. So now if we compile, and we can leave the delay at the default of 0.2 because that seems sufficient for the length of the sound effects. So if we go in here now, it's actually playing the sound effect as we're swinging. So now that we have that all set up, the next step is where stuff starts to get a lot more complicated. So we're going to try and do this relatively quickly, but I'll try and keep it somewhat simplified. So we'll add a reroute node up here so that we can keep this kind of neat, because we're going to have a bunch of stuff going all over the place. So we're going to do our branch, and we're going to get our first trace vector, and we're going to check to see, is this equal to 0? And we don't need to worry about our error tolerance. We'll just leave that as it is. And we'll do, if it's equal to 0, we'll plug that into here. We're going to go up here and we're going to set that so that this is going to be set to the location of one of the sockets on the blade mesh. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull off here and we'll do get socket location. So we don't really care about its rotation or scale. And then we will set that in the true. And then we're going to make sure that we're actually getting the correct socket name. So we're going to go ahead and I believe it was blade base socket. We can go back here to double check. Yeah, blade base socket. And then from here, we're gonna pull off here and do a sequence. And off of our second input here, we're going to copy, paste that, and we're going to set this after the first event fires. And the reason is, this is when we're going to be saving where the previous location was, so that the next time this fires, it'll see that that was the location. And because this won't equal 0 the second time that it fires, it'll go through false, it'll use that location, then it'll update it to the new current location. And the reason we're doing it this way is because basically if you were to do just a straight on trace to from the base of the weapon to the tip of the weapon, there's a chance that depending on frame rate drops, you might not actually register a hit on an enemy. So by doing it this way, we're actually getting the location that the weapon was at in a previous frame, and then we're updating it so that it's tracing from where it was the last frame to where it is this frame, and then it'll intercept everything in between so that you can make sure that you're actually hitting something. So basically, instead of, I'll pull up, let's do paint just for something simple to look at. So basically, instead of doing your trace from here to here, and then from here to here, where you're tracing along these, and you might hit an enemy that's standing like right here. Instead, we're going to get the location from here and trace over to here, and then we'll do the same thing from up here to trace to over here. And this way it'll actually do a trace from this point to this point, and it'll actually see the player or character or whatever, whereas just doing the straight base to tip or handle to tip, or however you want to refer to that, it would just miss. But doing it this way, you'll have a higher chance of hitting. And we'll do it from the base of the weapon, from the center of the weapon, and then we'll do another one from the tip, and we're going to do a sphere trace. We don't need to save that. So for the next step, we're gonna pull off here and we're gonna do a sphere, if I can type, trace for objects. And then from here, we're going to pull off of here and we're going to get that for our end location because we want to trace from wherever our previous location was, which is why we're saving these as our start. And we'll trace to where the socket is now. And then we can set up a radius on the sphere trace so that it'll cover more area on the blade. So we'll do a radius of 20. And then we're going to need to set up what we're actually looking for. So we will do make array. And we'll add a few pins here. And while we could do a search for pawns, that can run into some other issues for like the placement of where particle effects are going to hit when you're hitting an enemy. We don't want to hit their the collision capsule. We actually want to hit the physics body, which will be their actual skeletal mesh. So we're going to do physics body. We're going to do world static. We're going to do world dynamic. So in case you're like moving around on floating platforms or something, or on an elevator. And then we're going to do destructible, which we're not going to really tackle in this tutorial series, but this will allow you to actually attack destructible objects and break them and deal damage to them as well. And then from here, we're going to create a new variable and call this actors to ignore. And the reason we're doing it this way is because we want to make sure that the actors that are going to be added in here, which we will address elsewhere, are going to be ignored when we do the trace, so that first it's not tracing and hitting itself, and then it's not tracing and hitting the player wielding the weapon, because we only want the weapon to hit other enemies. So before we go on further than that, let's go ahead and let's go back to our begin play, and we'll set up the actors that we're going to actually need. So we'll go ahead and bring this in as a set. And then we'll do make array, and we'll add in 2 pins, and we're going to get the parent actor, which will be the character that's actually using the weapon. And then we're going to get self. And since we're over here, we're going to go ahead and pull off of here and get our effects volume, because we didn't do this in the last video. And we're going to get our saber hum effect. And we're going to go ahead and set volume multiplier. So this way, right when the game starts, whatever our volume is set at in our effects is going to be set immediately onto the humming effect. So then we can go off of that, plug this in, and then from here we're going to actually add in a new variable. We're going to call this owning actor, and we're going to make this an actor reference. And then we are going to go ahead and drag that in. We're going to actually make this instance editable and exposed on spawn. And we will go ahead and do is valid. So we're going to check to see if this variable is set, and we're going to use this for the multi-bladed weapons, because what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that a lightsaber or a child actor that we'll set up for like a double-bladed saber will just have two versions of itself, and then it can reference the previous one. So if, for instance, we have a double-bladed lightsaber and the second part of the blade gets turned on, we want to make sure that that is going to ignore the character, because otherwise, looking at it, because it's going to be parented to the first blade, it's going to get the parent actor as that first blade. So we want to make sure that it's getting the character as well. So we'll go ahead and if this is not valid, we're going to set this if it's not valid. And we'll add a reroute to clean that up a little. And if it is valid, we're going to pull off of here and we'll do add. And then from here, we're going to do another get. And the reason why we're doing it this way is we want to make sure that because we're going to do it is valid check again, just to be sure whether or not it was actually set. And this will avoid any potential errors that we might get. So if this gets set, then we're definitely going to want to add this into our ignore array. And then that'll take care of that. So we can go back down here. And the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create a macro. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up in here and we're going to hit this little plus to create a macro. We're going to call this calculate hits from trace. And then we're going to have it add in a few inputs. So we'll go ahead and add in 3. First is going to be hit info. And then the second one is going to stay a bool. We're going to call this one trace hit object. And we're going to use that to make sure, did we actually hit an object? If not, we're going to end the trace right there. And then for the third one, we're going to do spawn decal. And this is going to determine if we hit a static object, it'll determine whether or not we need to spawn a decal into it. So we can drag this out of the way. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in our branch with Control B. We're going to add that onto here, and we're going to adjust that up a little bit. Pull that. Straighten our connections. Okay, and then from here, we're going to drag off of our hit info so that we're getting whatever the trace is returning. And then we're actually going to add in a reroute node right here because we're going to need to pull this all the way over for the next step soon. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull off of the hit actor. So we're going to cast to pawn. So if we hit an object was true, we're going to continue on. We're going to go into our cast to pawn. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new variable and call this previously hit pawns. And we're going to leave that as an actor class, but we are going to change this to be an array. And then we're going to bring this in here, and we're going to get it. We're going to find item. So we're going to search in the array that we just created, and if we find it, it'll return the index that the item was at. If not, it's going to return a -1 value. So we're going to go up here and we're going to do greater than or equal to 0. So if this returns as true, then that means that we found that enemy in there, in which case we're going to add another branch here. And if we did find that hit target, it's going to come off of true, and then it's just going to stop. Because we already hit the enemy once, we don't want to hit them again. We want to make sure that when we hit the enemy, we're not going to hit them like a dozen times if the trace rate is too high. We only want them to be hit by the attack once per each attack. So from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a copy paste, and we'll do add. So off of the false, we're going to add the actor that we hit. Okay, so we're going to add the actor. Next, we are going to pull off from here, and we're going to cast to our third-person character. And then we'll go ahead and add another reroute. And we're going to kind of just skim over some of this real quickly just to set these variables up. And we'll worry about setting them up more specifically in one of the next videos. So we'll go ahead and go into our third-person character. And we're going to need to create a couple of new variables. So let's go ahead and create 3 variables, and we'll call this first one faction. And we're just going to make this an integer. and this will allow us to have like any number of factions that we want. And then we can set this and use this to determine if the enemy being, if the target being hit is the same value for their faction as the player, then no damage gets dealt. So this way you can avoid friendly fire. And if the number is different, then it would deal damage. And then for here, we're going to leave these two as bools. And the first one is going to be is blocking. And the second one will be is perfect blocking. And we'll worry about setting up all of these later, but we'll go ahead, compile, save, and then we can close that for now. Because now we can go into here and we can do this. We'll get our owning actor. We will cast to third person character. I'm gonna right click, convert to pure cast, because we should be able to get this value. And then we will get our faction. And then we will cast off of this to get our faction. And then we are going to get a not equal to make sure that these values are not the same. And then we can add in a bool, connect that up here, connect this in there, and then we will add in a couple more branches, and we're going to add this into our true, and then plug this one into our false. And then we're going to pull off of here again, and we're going to get blocking, and we're going to get perfect blocking. And we're going to plug this one in here and this one up here. Okay. So we'll go ahead and we will pull up. We're going to get spawn emitter at location. Now we don't have the particle effect set up yet, but I did include the starter content in this project. So let's go into here and we will create a copy of our sparks particle that comes with the engine by default, and we'll call this Saber Sparks. And what we're going to do in here real quick is we're just going to grab the spawn. We're going to go in here and we'll set that to 20. And we will set this to be 0, and then we're going to do pretty much the same thing for the other two. Actually, no, that's... I want this on the burst list, not the burst scale. So, 900. And then 12. And then we're going to go into here. And under where it says emitter loops, we're going to change that to be 1 for all three. And then I think that we want to make sure that that's 0 on all 3 of these. And we could probably lower this one a little bit, or set it up so that it has a range, so we'll do like 300. And then we'll save, make sure that we have that selected in there, and then we will set that as our template. And then to get the location, we're going to go all the way back here, and we're going to get our impact point. Bring that all the way over here. Try to get that straight. And then, because we're probably going to need this elsewhere, we'll add a reroute node there just in case. And then off of here, we're going to go ahead and say that, okay, did they get perfect blocked? Yes. We'll go up here, and then we will play sound at location. And like I said, we were probably going to need that, so we'll go ahead and bring this down. And then for this, we're going to need to do basically the same thing as before with our other sounds, so we'll go ahead and do this. And that will get our effects volume, and we'll plug that in. We'll set up our sound effect attenuation, which, now that I think about it, I don't think we set up before on here. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick for the swing effect. So we'll go attenuation, effect attenuation, and we can pop back into our macro that we were working on. And for the sound, we're going to do another select, similar to what we did with the swing effect, but this time we're going to do for the hit effects. So we're going to add 2 pins. We're going to random int range 0 to 3, and then we're gonna grab some sounds real quick. So I think we want to use I think these 3 should work pretty decently, so we'll right click, create a cue, set U, set U, set U, and set U. So now if we get perfect blocked by an enemy, it'll play the sound effect when it hits them, and then we will go immediately to end attack. So this way it'll just end the attack and then it'll stop tracing. Next we're going to do get parent actor. We're going to cast to third person character. And then we're going to get our mesh and pull off here to play montage. And so this way, if you go to swing at an enemy and they block, at exactly the same time or thereabouts, it'll set it up so that you can play a stagger animation. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab one real quick, and we'll just grab one from in here and look for, see if there's a damage animation. Let's see, there's a dodge, there's a death animation, fall down, hit back. Let's see. I think that'll be sufficient. So we'll go ahead and we'll right click, retarget that, set it to our skeleton, and we'll go ahead, go in here and drop it into our mannequin folder, retarget it, and then we will right click and go to create anim montage, and then just make sure that it's in the default slot. And then save that, go back in here, and we will use that animation so that it'll stagger the player. And then from there, we're going to add in a new event on our player character, which we're not going to do anything with just yet. And do custom event and call this perfect blocked. So we'll pull this out a little bit, but we'll worry about this for a future video. And this will be called on the player to do any kind of like stagger events to make sure that like the player can't try and attack again until after a certain amount of time, so that they recover from their staggering animation or something to that effect. And then we can compile, save, go back in here, and then we will pull off of here and just do a call to that event, which again we're not going to worry about right now. We will set that one up later, and then we'll add in some reroute nodes, make this look a little bit more legible. And then that'll take care of the perfect blocked route. So the next route is going to be if they are blocking. And if they are blocking, then we're going to pull off of here, and actually we're just going to copy you and paste you down here. So we're going to use the same spark effect, and we're going to spawn it at the same impact location, because if we look back here, we're spawning it at the point where the trace is actually hitting. And then we're going to copy all three of you, and we'll kind of line you up a little bit down here. And then we'll set your location to be the same. So this way, if you hit someone and they're blocking, it's not going to stagger you, but it will set up draining stamina and whatnot, so that like enemies can't block indefinitely. And then off of our third route, we're going to apply point damage. And then I'm going to set this to be something like 50. And we'll promote that to a variable and call this weapon damage. This way we can scale that variable up and down as we need, even at runtime. So like if the character gets some kind of damage boost effect or something. And then the damaged actor is going to be, actually, now we want, doesn't really matter, but we're gonna go ahead and we're going to plug this into here so that it's going to damage the pawn, because we don't need to do the cast at that point, because apply damage is a pawn event that it can recognize, or I believe it's actor level, but regardless. And then from here we're actually going to pull off of our hit info. We're going to drag this down and we're going to plug that into our hit info so that we know which direction everything came from and can transmit that onto the player when they receive the damage event. And then from hit direction, we're going to pull off of our impact normal. I'm not sure if this really matters for too much, but the engine spits out an error if you don't plug it into something, because it wants to know which direction everything came from. And then for this, we're going to go ahead and set up our damage causer to be a self-reference. And then we don't have any damage types set up currently, so let's go ahead and make one real quick. So we'll go in here and we will create a blueprint class, and we'll create damage type. And we'll call this Lightsaber damage type. And we don't really need to do anything with this for right now. And for that matter, I'm not really sure that I'm gonna do too much with it in general for this tutorial series, but you can use this to do like more advanced effects for like if you want to do like different types of particle effects or sound effects that fire off when a player gets hit or something. But for just this, we're going to use this just to determine what the class is, and then we'll use that to branch off in different directions depending on what type of damage it is. So, for example, if you're getting hit by the lightsaber, you might want to do some kind of check to see, okay, is this actually lightsaber damage? If it is, okay, then is it dealing lethal damage? Okay, then maybe we want to cut off an arm or a leg or something. Whereas if you're getting hit by a blaster bolt, you don't want to necessarily be cutting limbs off, because that would look a little bit silly. So, in order to avoid shooting someone in the leg and then their leg getting cut off, or shooting someone in the arm and their whole arm getting blown off, which is something we didn't really see in any of the Star Wars films. And for that matter, I don't think that they ever showed anything to that effect in any of Star Wars canon. Because the only times they ever showed limbs getting severed, I think, was usually from lightsabers or some type of vibroblade. If you're looking at like the video games and whatnot. So now we got our damage set up. So from here, this top half is all pretty much configured. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the bottom half for future video, but the basically, if it's not upon, we're going to do a different trace, and that's going to determine, okay, hey, you're hitting a wall or something, let's leave some decals to show that the lightsaber cutting the wall and like burning it and melting the metal or whatever the surface is supposed to be. So leaving the little glowing burning trails. But we'll worry about that for a future video. For right now, we're going to worry about just setting this up for damaging the player. So, actually, no, we're not closing out yet. But I think we are done in here for right now. So we'll go back out here. And now we need to actually call this macro. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to call this. And we're going to return whether we trace something, and then we do not want this one to spawn the decal, and I'll explain why later, but the short simple reason is if we spawn the decal from every trace, what's going to end up happening is it's basically going to tell it, okay, so when we do this first trace up here for the base of the weapon, we're going to do a trace to see if, hey, did we hit a wall? Should we spawn the decal on the wall? And then it'll go through on the second run from, let's say, the center of the blade, and then it'll try and spawn the decal again. And then it'll go through from the tip, and it'll try and spawn the decal again. We only want to spawn one decal. We don't need them being layered up on top of each other. So that's what this bool is basically doing. And I can explain more specifically later. But again, I'll leave that for another video. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy all of this. And we're going to paste it. And we're going to drag this over to connect this up. And then we are going to change all of these variables. So instead of the blade base socket, we're going to do the blade center socket, which I believe is what it was called, which we can double check. Yeah, blade base socket, tip socket, center socket, and each one has the prefix of blade. So blade center socket, and then we're going to want to control drag this out so that we can get our get. We're going to control click to drag this over and delete that. And then we're going to alt drag to get our set. And we're going to control drag to connect these up, and then we can delete that one. And then we're going to control drag to hook these up to that, and then we can delete that one. And then you can also, of course, just drag directly on and look until it says change node to read, and then it'll just change and update it from the previous variable that it was set to, which was A, and now it's reading from B. And then everything else is pretty much the same, but now it's pulling from a different socket. It's setting a different variable, and it's checking that different variable and updating that. And then we can copy this and paste this down here. And then we can connect this up over here and do the exact same thing, except now we want this to get from the tip socket. And we're going to just drag onto each of these. Now those are all C. And we'll do for duration for this just to show that it's working. Compile, and we will do save all so we don't lose any of our work in case something crashes. We'll go in here, make this full size. Now, you can see that it's leaving the spheres, but it's not actually doing the proper trace. So, let's see if I can figure out what is going on with that, and I will be right back. Okay, so I figured out what I missed, and it was actually fairly simple. Basically, if we look at our function and we go through from where it starts, we're going in here, we're getting this variable, and then if it returns false, it's just setting this to where this is at. We forgot to connect this up. So let's go ahead and do that on all three of these. And now when we test, it should work. So go ahead, save all. Pull our weapon out, and now when we swing, you see how it's doing the trace from each position, so we get that nice striping effect as it goes outwards. And this will make it more likely that we can actually hit something. Whereas if we were doing it just straight from the weapon hilt out to the tip of the weapon, it would have a chance of missing, because like you see how much distance there is between each point in here. And with the sphere trace, we only have to do a few of them to actually get decent coverage for the whole weapon. So it's very unlikely that you're going to end up with an enemy that's so thin that it would miss that. And then of course you can see the green for when it's hitting an object, showing that it is actually making contact and detecting. So like right there, it clipped into the wall a little bit. So this is working now, so we can go ahead and we can disable the debug drawing. And the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set it up so that the player themselves can actually be damaged. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a child blueprint class. We're going to call this base AIBP, and we'll just drop this guy into the world. And this way, if we want to do any advanced AI settings, we can set those all up from this guy, but he still inherits all of the same functions from our main class. So we're not going to worry about changing anything in him right now, because that's not really the focus of the video. But we are going to go in here and we're going to get point damage. And we're going to get our event point damage. And okay, and we're going to go in here and we're going to go ahead and get a self reference. We're going to make sure we're still valid, because if say for example a character is being hit but they're already being killed and the actor is being destroyed and removed, we don't want this to do anything else. Otherwise it tends to spit out errors. So next we're going to go ahead and we will do a branch, and we're going to call this up so that this checks to see if we are blocking. And then plug that into our true. And if blocking is false, because again we're going to worry about blocking and perfect blocking for a different video, but we're just going to assume that, oh yeah, the player is not blocking. So let's go ahead and we will get our health. We're gonna shrink this a little bit so we got a little bit more room to work with. And then we're going to subtract float from float. We're going to pull off of our damage, plug that in so our health is subtracting our damage that our actor is receiving. And then we're going to clamp this value to a float, and we're going to, not that, we want health max. So this will clamp the value that gets returned between 0 and the maximum health. So say for example, if you want set up some kind of healing event that's done on a point basis, so like you fire a gun and it shoots point damage at someone but it heals them, you would be able to set it up so that you can just damage them and it'll play whatever the effect is based off of your damage type class that you set up. And then you can have it set up so that instead of being added or instead of being subtracted, you can use a negative number, which will go in here, and it'll instead add the health instead of subtracting it. So we will go ahead, and from here we are going to go ahead and we'll plug that into here and set our health. So if blocking is false, we're going to just take the damage. And then we're going to get our damage type and cast to, and then we're going to get our lightsaber damage type, and we'll go ahead and add some reroutes so this isn't so messy looking. We'll plug that in here, pull this back, and so now, okay, yeah, we're getting hit with a lightsaber, so let's go ahead and we will spawn emitter at location. And of course, if we go back into here, we can find our reference real quick, which was the saber sparks. So we'll go ahead and we'll have that selected, and we'll go in here, and we're just going to use the same effect. If you want to have different effects depending on what the object is that's being hit, you can set those up on your own, but I'm trying to keep this a little bit more simplified. So we'll go ahead and we'll leave that as is, and then we're going to go back here and we're going to get our hit info, and we're going to break the hit result. And set up some reroute nodes, clean that up a little, and we're going to get our impact point, plug that right into our location. And then we're going to go ahead and pull this back a little bit, and we're going to get force. Nope, we did not set up that event yet, actually, so yeah, because we have our force draw weapon, but we don't have our force stop firing, and that is actually set up as a function. So let's go back down here, and I think I made it as a function just to clean up a little bit of the stuff going on. So we're going to get our weapon, we're going to get our child actor, we will cast to lightsaber, and then we will do end attack. And then what we're going to do from here is we're going to pull this off, we're going to do a reroute node just to have something out there. Then we're going to select these and we're going to right click and collapse to function. We're going to call this function force weapon stop firing. So this will stop the weapon from firing whatever attack events it's using. And then of course we can remove that now. So if we open this up, it'll be set up so that you call it, and we'll just do that real quick so that we can pop this over here just for ease of reading, so that we know that, oh yeah, it's going through and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So we can close that out. So now that that's doing what it's doing, we can play sound at location. And actually we are going to once again be borrowing these, copy and paste, because for the moment we're just going to use the exact same sound effects for everything. If you want to do something more advanced, maybe you have better sounds for each situation, for like what you're hitting or how you're moving the weapon or whatever, you can use whatever you want. This is just what I'm using. So you can of course set these up to different sounds if you really want to, just to distinguish between the different types of hits. And then one thing that we're going to want to do real quick is there is no begin play event on here, so let's go ahead and set one. And we're going to do basically what we did on the weapon. We're going to get our game instance, we're going to cast to it, and then we are going to promote to variable. Call this game inst ref. So that way when the game starts, it'll set up the reference for this. So then we can go back down here and actually let's add some comments. So this was our weapon drawing functions. So make that like a green color, greenish. And then we'll set up a comment around this and call this take damage. And I'm gonna adjust the size a little bit because we're not quite done with this. This is gonna get a little bit bigger too. And we'll make this just straight red to indicate that, yeah, you're taking damage and it's gonna be messy. Alright, so next we're gonna need our sound to have a location to play from. So we're gonna once again pull off of our impact point. Gonna add in some reroute nodes by double clicking so that we can prettify that up a bit. And then we're going to grab our game instance reference and get our effects volume. And we're going to pull these back a little bit, plug those into our volume multiplier. We're going to set up our attenuation. And then from here, we are going to get our health value. And we are going to see, are you less than or equal to 0? So if for whatever reason the health gets set to a negative value, it still will fire this when you're taking damage, which it shouldn't based on the clamp, but there might be some edge case where somehow, like, something weird happens that'll cause that, some math error or something. So we're just going to have it be less than 0 or equal to 0, just in case. And then we'll plug this in here. And from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do, if you are less than 0, less than or equal to 0, we're going to disable movement, because we don't want the character to be able to move anymore. And then we will get our capsule component, because we're going to make it so that when the player dies or the enemy dies, their capsule component, we're going to disable the collision on it. So we will set collision enabled, and we're going to have that as no collision. And we're going to disable generate overlaps, because once the character's dying, we don't want them to be firing any events off anymore, because the character is dead. We are removing them. We don't want anything to be trying to reference them. And then from here, we're going to do once and then we are going to play montage. And we're going to get our mesh, plug that into our skeletal mesh component, and then let's go back into here and let's look at, let's see, we had one death animation in here, but let's take a look at our expansion, see if we can find some more. So let's do battle root. Maybe it's under hit. So we'll do root under hit. There we go. So we got 4 different death animations here, so we can get some variety. We'll right click to retarget these. We'll grab our mannequin skeleton mesh. We will go ahead and change these. Actually, real quick before we do that, we want to set up our folder for this, just so we know where we're sending them. And then now we will retarget. So grab you, go ahead, root, mannequin, okay. And then hit retarget, go in here, and we will select all of those, and we will create anim montages for all of them, and then we will save everything, and then go ahead and grab that, and do a select, and we're gonna add a couple of option pins. So we'll do the one we had selected for the first one, we'll grab the second one, grab the third one, and then grab the fourth one. And then we will do random int in range. Once again, we'll do our trusty 0 to 3. And then off of this, we're going to do a delay. And we'll set this up to be not something too small, but something so that the enemy will just kind of be laying there for a bit. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that to be 5. And we will pull off of that and do destroy actor. But of course, we do have a problem with this. And the problem is, if we just destroy the actor, if the player dies, they just get destroyed and then nothing happens. So what we actually need to do is we need to expand on this a little bit first. So what we'll actually do is we'll add in a branch. We'll plug that into the false. And we'll pull off and we will get player is player controlled. So if it's controlled by a player, we are actually going to want to get actor of class, and we are going to get a player start. I will plug this in. And then we are going to get transform, and we are going to expand this a little bit first and then grab spawn actor from class. And real quick, we are going to go in here and we're going to make this instance editable so that we can expose it on spawn, so that when we grab this, we can plug that in, and we can plug this into here. Where are you? No. Get class. No, that's not the right one. Here, we will get a self-reference and then try, because we want to get the class that our character is. So we'll go ahead and we will get that, which is coming out as third-person character class reference, and we will plug that into the class so that it's still, because it's registering that it's pulling from itself, so it's pulling this up as though this is the third-person character. So when we plug this into here, we still have access to our faction. The reason we want to do this is in case for some reason during runtime, say you want to decide to execute Order 66, you can change the faction of a character at runtime so that AI-controlled characters that were previously allies might turn into enemies, or enemies might turn into allies, or however you want to work that. But anyways, that should be good for that. And then we'll compile real quick to get rid of that error. And then we will pull off of here. Actually, no, we want to get controller. So we want to get the controller that this character is using, and we want to possess. So we'll spawn in ourselves at a player start so that we can respawn, and then we can plug the returned actor into the pawn spot for possessing so that we can get our controller that the player is using, and then we can possess the newly spawned pawn. And then from here we can of course drag down into here, because once we've respawned we don't need to keep the previous player around any longer. So we will go ahead, compile, and save. Save all just to be sure. And now when we go in here, we'll notice that we have our guy over here. And it doesn't seem like it's hitting him, so I think what we forgot to do is we forgot to set up our collision on the mesh. So if we go in here, it's by default it'll be set to character mesh. So we're going to set this to custom. We're going to set overlap events. We're going to set hit events. This way we can make sure that all of our traces and overlap events for whatever we're trying to do for any kind of checks will hit the character mesh, because that's what we're going to be looking at for where the locations are of a lot of these events. Case in point, if we hit someone with the lightsaber in the arm, we want the effect to hit the arm. So we want to make sure that this is on, and then we're going to change you from pawn to physics body. And then we're going to change physics body to be overlap. And we're going to disable destructible for right now because we're not going to worry about any of that. So we're going to set this to collision enabled query and physics. Now when we try, it should register. So let's see. It is still not doing anything. So let's check on here. Let's set this to custom. We will disable camera so that we don't have to worry about the camera getting clipped into characters in some weird way and zooming in like stupid close to the player. And we will disable physics body interaction. Let's see if that does anything. So we got our damage. I'm actually going to investigate this real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I think I figured it out. So it wasn't actually anything that we did wrong in here, but we did skip a step in here. So if we go in here, I forgot to add in this, because if we look at our end attack call, one of the things that we did forget was after we end the trails and then we go through to stop the timeline for doing the traces, we also needed to come in here and we needed to clear our previously hit pawns array. So this way when you swing again, it'll have that completely emptied for each attack. But that wasn't our actual issue. Our actual issue is when we created our AI and dropped them into the world, we forgot about our faction. By default, this still has the exact same setting as the player. So since this is equal to 0, when we run up to them and try to attack, it does nothing. But if we go in here and we change this to another number, so let's just like change it from 0 to 1. Now when we try, you can see it actually hit. And of course we notice an issue there with the animation montage where when he dies he just kind of flops over and then pops right back up. So we're going to fix that real quick. So if we go back into our montages, we are going to pull this up here. We're going to go in here and we're going to find a spot where it's like right about at the end. So it doesn't need to be super close to it, but we want to be as close to the end as we can get, so that we're at the end. We're going to call this we'll call this death loop. And then from here we're going to click on that and then click here, and then that'll set it up so that when we do our animation, it'll fall down and then it'll just stay dead. Because otherwise, by default, as soon as the montage ends, he'll just pop back into his default animations from the animation blueprint. We don't want that. So now that we fixed that for this one, let's go ahead and do the same thing on these other ones. So let's kind of get so we can see, get like right about here, new montage section, death loop, and click on here and then click here to make it loop. So now when we watch it, they'll fall down, play their animation, and then it'll loop that last frame. So we can hit save and then do the same thing on this one. It's like right about there. Right click, new montage section, death loop. And then select that, click there to make that loop. And then we're going to do that one more time for our fourth animation. Kind of get the gist of this. So we want to be like right around here. New montage section, death loop. Click, click. And now, when we pop in here, and we kill them, they fall over and they stay dead. And then after a few seconds, it'll remove them from the world. So now we have a weapon that will hit things, will hit enemies at least. But real quick, just so we're not going to go into the decals in this video, but we are going to quickly set it up so that if we look at our calculate hits function and we go in here, if we get from the cast failed, we're going to do a branch. We're going to check, did we actually hit something? Yes. Then we are going to do a sphere trace for objects. And we're going to get parent actor, actor location. And this will be useful for when we go to set up the placement of our decals, because I believe that we are actually going to use the hit result from this for determining that, but we're also going to be using this for where we're going to spawn the impact effects. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to get our blade, get socket location. We want blade tip socket, and we're going to plug that into the end. Make an array, add. We don't need all the variable types for this because for this we already ruled out that it's not a pawn, so we're not going to worry about physics bodies, but we're going to have our world static, our world dynamic, and our destructible. And then we are going to make, and in this instance we are not going to worry about the array that we had set up from before. We're just going to have 2 pins to get a reference to self and parent actor. So we're going to make sure that we're ignoring the player. And then we are going to go ahead and we're going to pull off of our hit result. So break hit result. And from here, we're going to spawn emitter at location. And we don't have that many in here, so we'll go ahead and we'll grab our saber sparks. And we're going to plug that into our impact point. And then we're going to pop this down a little bit, move this all down, and then we are going to do once. We will play sound at location, and we're just going to use the same impact sounds from before. So copy, paste, and then we're going to plug in our impact point into the location for that as well. And then next we are going to do a delay. And pull this up slightly. And then we're going to have this come into here, and then we're going to set this to be a delay of 0.5, so that way we're not playing the hit sound effect too many times in a row. So we'll go ahead and add that in. And then last but not least, we are going to, because we forgot to do this over here too actually, we want to plug this into our volume multiplier here. We already set up our effect attenuator there, so we'll copy this, bring this down here, plug that into our volume, and we will set up our attenuation. So I think that should, let's double check this one. Yep. I think that should do it for that. So now, if we compile, save, and we test, we see that it's actually hitting the walls now too. It's still hitting our player, and they play their random death animation, and then they get removed. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for this video, because this one's probably already running really long. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and continue on with this and finish with all the rest of the effects and setup and stuff. So until next time.